everyone, and welcome to our unit on the elements of art. The elements of art are what artists use to make art. In fact, all artworks are made up of the elements of art. In this lesson, we're going to be covering the first element of art, which is line, and there's going to be an art lesson at the very end. Line is probably one of the most simple elements there are. In fact, it's one of the most simplest terms in art that there is. It's a line. It goes from point A to point B with a connection between the 2 points. Now, something that a lot of people don't know about line is there's actually 2 different types. The first type being a defined line, while the other type being an implied line. A defined line is a line that separates 2 objects. For instance, you have a defined line around the apple on the left, where a defined line is separating the foreground from the background. You see a distinct black line around the apple that tells your eye this is different from the background and the foreground. It separates 2 different areas. On the other hand, the apple on the right uses implied line. Even though you do not actually see a line around the apple, your eye can visually tell you that this is a highlight because there is an implied line that connects the other values and separates the background from the foreground, even though there's nothing that's actually there to define a separation. Now that we know the difference between a defined line and an implied line, let's look at some examples. So pause the video and I want you to count how many triangles you see in this artwork. Did you finish counting? The correct answer is 0. There are 0 triangles in this artwork. A triangle is made up of 3 lines and 3 corners, all 3 lines connected. There is no third line or third corner connecting any of these shapes. It is implied that the lines are there.
I don't get it.
Kind of like in this artwork. This artwork, whenever you look at it, you can see that it's a bunch of lines, but your eye may tell you that there's also 2 triangles inside of this artwork. That is from wherever the lines meet at a corner and create an implied line that creates a diamond, or actually 2 diamonds in this artwork. Now, this is a more advanced topic in art, but line placement and line thickness also plays a crucial role in creating artwork. So for instance, in this artwork, obviously it's a cat. We know it's a cat because of the way that the line is placed in the form of a cat. However, line thickness also plays a role. We understand a cat to have bushy tails, so the line for the tail in this artwork is a lot thicker than the lines for the ears because cats have very delicate, thin ears, or even the whiskers. If these 2 line thicknesses were swapped, this would no longer look like a cat. Instead, it would look more like a rat, because a rat and a cat have very similar structure, but the line will actually make one animal look more like the other. It is line placement and line thickness that creates the illusion that the paper is actually curving up and folding down like a weight. In actuality, this is just a flat piece of paper. Now, I do have students comment and say that there's shading on there and the shading adds to the illusion, and yes, that is true. The shading does add to the illusion, but the line thickness and placement is the majority of this illusion. Even if you take out the shading, you will still see a wave in the lines because when the lines get closer to the viewer, they get thicker. When they're further away, they get smaller. And that is the element of art known as line. So what is your all's lesson for today? This lesson actually takes 2 days. We are going to be creating our very own optical illusion using your hand. So this is a very simple project. I like to give it to my students as an introduction course. Basically, you are going to be tracing your hand. Then you are going to be taking a ruler and you're going to be drawing lines on there to create the illusion that your hand is coming up out of the paper. I'm going to be stepping you through this entire process, and we're going to have a tutorial video on this so you can pause it and watch along with it. First thing you're going to need, piece of paper. Second thing you're going to need, ruler. Third thing you're going to need, pencil. maybe not so aggressively. But you will need these. The first step in making this artwork, you are going to lay down your hand and you are going to trace it on the paper. Don't trace it down here and don't trace it like this. Try and make it take up the majority of the paper like this and trace your hand on there.
Wow.
The next step is to make tick marks on the left and right hand side of your paper. And yes, you do need it on the left and right hand side. You are going to want to make these tick marks every ½ inch. For those of you who do not know, from 0 to 1 is an inch. That means that this mark halfway in between is ½ an inch. So you want to make a mark with your paper starting here, make a mark there, make a mark at 1, make a mark at 1½ and keep on going down the ruler. If you did this correctly, you should have a total of 21 tick marks going down one side of your paper. Now you're going to take your ruler and do the exact same thing on the other side. And yes, it is very important that you make those tick marks on both sides. And the reason for that is because whenever you start drawing these lines, you're going to be connecting them by lining up the 2 points on either side. And if you don't have this lined up right, your lines are going to go everywhere and it's not going to give you the illusion you're looking for. Whenever you hold your ruler, make sure that you hold your ruler like this with space in the middle with your fingers spaced apart. Because if you hold the ruler off to the side like this, it's very easy to move this ruler and get it off center. However, if you put all your pressure in the middle of the ruler, you no longer can move it. So what you want to do, line up these lines and draw a line connecting them. You are going to draw these lines connecting until you get to your hand outline. Once you get to your hand outline, skip over your hand. So just pick up your pencil, move over, and then continue on. Now the next step is to bring this illusion up to the foreground. And how we're going to do that, you're going to go back over to your hand, and wherever these lines met at your hand outline, you're going to curve upwards like you are going around your fingers or your hand in the direction that it's curving. So it's curving up like this. You're going to make kind of like an upside down U or a curve or maybe a crescent moon shape, connecting those lines together. And you're going to continue that throughout the rest of the hand. Now the final step is to bring this illusion into the current space. And how you're going to do that, just a little bit of shading around one side of your hand. Okay, now I know that was quick example. I want you to know I did this artwork in a time frame of like 10 minutes.
It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. It's a banana.
You all are going to be having 2 full days to work on this. So my expectation for you is to do more than just this. And I don't mean quantity wise, I mean quality wise. Because in my class, if you have not learned this yet, or if I have not told you, I grade you based on one thing and one thing only, and that is your work ethic. The more you work on something, the better your grade is going to be. If you just try to hurry up and get this done in 10 minutes, yeah, it's possible. But you worked 10 minutes on something that should have took you 2 hours. You're not going to get a good grade for that. However, if you work on something really hard and if you try to make it as best as you can make it, but you don't get finished with it, you still get full credit. And that's how all my lessons work, and that's how they're going to work moving forward. If you'd like to color this, you can. If you want to shade it, you can. If you get finished with this and you're like, I don't have anything else to do on it, I think it's perfect, then you're going to start another one because I grade you based on your work ethic. I want to drill that home. I grade you based on your work ethic. Keep that in mind. Thank you all very much. Hope you enjoy the lesson. See you next time. Today we're going to be continuing our lesson with the elements of art. However, we're also going to be having a 2-part lesson today. 1 for the element of art and 2 for the project itself. The element of art we're looking at today is shape, and shape happens whenever you have a line. So from point A to point B, that line either closes off and meets itself back around, or it intersects other lines. Basically, if it is left open, it's a line. If it is closed, then it's a shape. Now there's two different types of shapes: geometric shapes and organic shapes. Geometric is the root word of geometry, or in other words, it's a shape that you can make using math. Pretty much if it has a straight line, if it has corners, or if it's a circle or an oval, it's a geometric shape. If you can look at that and say, oh, that is triangle, rectangle, hexagon, dodecagon, all those are geometric shapes. And an organic shape means that it is very difficult to reproduce it, just like our example that we have here. I like to think of organic shapes either being like something in nature, like a leaf, that no matter how many leaves you look at, there's always going to be something that is different with each one. Or possibly like if you look at a parking lot and you see a puddle with some oil on it and you see all those little pretty colors and shapes in them, all of those are organic shapes. So why are shapes important? Believe it or not, artists actually see the world around them as shapes. And the reason for that is because it makes it a lot easier for you to interpret things when you look at them as simple shapes. For example, looking at this, if I were to tell my students to paint or draw the picture of the apples that you see here, most of them are going to look at that and say, how exactly do you expect me to do that? Look at those shapes, look at the coloring on there, and I don't even know what those things are down at the bottom of that cloth. I'm not going to do that.
I can't do it. I can't do it, Squidward.
They're overthinking it, and more than likely you are probably overthinking this too. You see, those are not apples. They are just shapes. They are basic circles, and then the stems are rectangles. Everything down below it, it's just organic shapes. And then once you get those basic shapes down, it doesn't have to match perfectly. The rest of the artwork becomes a coloring book page. And we all have done coloring book pages. You just took something that's really complicated and made it something really simple and approachable. That is why shapes are so important to artists. And I'm going to be telling you this from now until the end of your time in my class. You need to break everything down into basic shapes. So let's look at some examples. I have a few pictures I want you to look at and pause. Are they geometric shapes or are they organic shapes? Do you have your answer? This is a bunch of organic shapes. Now, some of them, for instance, the little red square looking thing you see right there, might look like a square. It's not really a square. It's still a torn piece of paper. If you look closely at it, there are some wavy lines on there. All of those are organic shapes because they don't have straight lines or corners, and none of those shapes you can actually recognize as shapes. Well, what about this? Is this organic shapes or geometric shapes? While it might be an organic subject matter, all the shapes on the inside of it are made up of geometric shapes. Triangles, rectangles, and circles. What about this? Is it geometric or is it organic? If you said both, then you are correct. It has both of them on there. You have the geometric shapes, such as the triangles and rectangles, and then you have the organic shapes like the booger thing and the jelly bean. I don't know. Last one. Is this organic or geometric? While at first glance this might look like all geometric shapes, there actually is one organic shape that takes up the majority of the artwork, and that is Iron Man himself. Now that concludes our presentation on the elements of art known as shape. However, that's not where our total presentation ends. Instead, I need to introduce you to your lesson. And for that lesson, we're going to be looking at Zentangled. Now, Zentangled is an art form that has actually been around a little bit longer than the name state that it has, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But basically, Zentangled is a method of getting into a Zen state while completing artwork. It's a great way to let your mind kind of wander while you are creating art, and you can come up with some really extravagant, wondrous things like you see here in this example. Like I mentioned, Zentangled is kind of like a meditation type deal where it's meditating while doing art. It's recommended that you use a pen so you can't go back and erase what you did. Instead, it's left on the paper and you have to either deal with it or work around it. Now, the name Zentangled was actually pioneered by these two creators right here. The main creator is Maria Thomas, and she's a professional calligrapher, and the man in the picture is her partner, Rick Roberts. She was describing to him one day about her process of making calligraphy, which is actually right here, where she just kind of said that she starts an artwork and kind of gets lost in it. And then he told her, hey, that's a lot like meditation. And they kind of thought about this and worked back and forth and started selling this as a course as Zentangled. But in actuality, Zentangled has been around for a lot longer than that. Think of it this way. It was kind of like Sir Isaac Newton discovering gravity. Gravity had been around forever. He just put a name to it. Just like with this has been around forever, they just put a name to it. And as proof that this has been around forever, this is actually one of my artworks that I made before I even heard about Zentangled. It was around the same time as their development of it. And I've been doing this for years because it's a form of art known as doodling. So what's the point in Zentangled? Well, the point in Zentangled is to fill in every single gap that you possibly can with something. Shapes, objects, imagery, pretty much whatever you want to put in those empty spaces, you can. What we are going to be using this for is creating your very own Zentangled using shapes. So see how I tied that back in with the elements of art? Now, the purpose with this assignment is to introduce you to the idea of taking longer than just a few minutes on an artwork. This is an artwork or an art piece that you're going to be spending a week on. So an entire week of school, you're going to be spending on this one project. And that means that you can't just rush it and get it done. You need to really dedicate some time to it and let yourself get lost in the artwork. And as you can see here, I just start with a basic shape and I just start adding in all these other shapes into it. Little detail lines here and there, filling in gaps, and I'm not thinking about anything that's going on there. I started with a square, drew some little squiggly lines in there and just said, hey, that kind of looks like an eye, or hey, that kind of looks like a flower, that kind of looks like this. And I just let my imagination go. And that's pretty much what you're doing with this artwork. You will be having an entire week to dedicate to creating a Zentangled. It's going to be on a full sheet of paper, so a regular 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. You can ink it if you choose to. You can just use pencil. It's entirely up to you. But you will be spending a week on this. So even if you get finished with it, you're going to be starting another one. Please keep in mind, I do not grade you based on finishing. I grade you based on your work ethic. So the longer you work on it or the harder you work on it, the better grade you're going to get. If you try and finish it in just a few minutes and slack off for the rest of the week, your grade will reflect that. Thank you all very much. I hope you enjoy this lesson. If you have any questions, let me know. In this lesson, we'll be covering the element of art known as value. Value is a pretty straightforward element of art. It basically means how light or dark something is. And I like to give students this visual image of going into a paint store or going into Lowe's, going back to the paint section, something like that, and you get those little color swatches that have how light or dark a color is. That is a value scale. It's mainly used for telling variations in depth, distance, and shading. So the use of it is to make something look three-dimensional. So even though this is a two-dimensional surface, a piece of paper, but the use of shading changes this into a form. And form is another element of art that we'll get into later. For now, we're going to be focusing on the shading aspect of it, and that is what value is. Now, there's actually 4 different types of shading that we are going to be getting into, or 4 different ways to make value. The first one is called shading, and shading is whenever you take your pencil and you hold it a very specific way. For instance, like this, where you have your 3 fingers on your hand wrapped around the wooden part of the pencil, your thumb resting on the bottom of the pencil, your pointer finger near the top of the pencil. And the idea behind this is you are going to lay the pencil down on a piece of paper like this, so you have more surface area. That will allow you to shade more effectively. What you want to do is hold the pencil like this, go around in small circles and apply pressure, and that will get you a darker value. So how you make a value scale using shading is you go to your darkest area, or the darkest square that you see up here, hold the pencil like you're supposed to, and go around in really tight circles and apply pressure while it's laying on its side. That will widen out your surface area, make it easier to shade, and will also allow you to get darker values because you can apply more pressure this way than you can this way. And then you move over to the next square. You widen out your circle a little bit, pick up on your pencil, and then you make a lighter value, and you continue going down those squares until you get to the very last square, which is white. And you don't have to do anything with that because, I mean, the paper's white, so you know, easy job right there. Good work.
Wow.
The next thing we're going to be looking at is hatching. Hatching is very simple. It is a diagonal line that goes one direction. That's it, just one direction diagonal line. The closer together the diagonal line is, the less of the white paper you can see, therefore the darker the value. Whenever you space those lines further apart, you see a little bit more and a little bit more of the white paper, and that gives you the illusion that there's different values there. So it gets from darker, where all the lines are really close together, then the lines are spaced further apart and spaced further apart, and it gets lighter and lighter and lighter until the very last square, where it's just a blank white square.
Wow.
The third way to make a value is with cross-hatching, and cross-hatching is done exactly the same way as hatching, except for every diagonal line you go one way, you make another diagonal line going the other way. It's kind of like crisscrossing. So you have your fingers like this, for instance. When they're closer together, you can't see through them, and as the lines get further apart, you can start seeing a little bit more. That's cross-hatching.
Wow.
And the last one is stimpling, but we're not going to be doing stimpling. The reason why is because I always have kids that destroy my art supplies for doing stimpling, because with stimpling, you're just make a dot and then you move over and make a dot and you move over and make another dot, and then before long someone grabs a handful of pencils and go blah, 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 and just ruins my tables. Here's some examples of different types of values: hatching and cross hatching up at the top, as well as stimpling down at the bottom. This is an example of proper shading using pencils. This is an example of hatching and cross hatching using chalk. And finally, an example of stimpling using a pencil that, once again, we're not going to do. So that leads me to your all's lesson. You're actually going to be having 2 days to work on this. The first day, we are going to be working on a value scale, and I'm going to be showing you the proper way to hold a pencil, how to properly shade. Tomorrow, you're going to be making a series of circles that you're then going to shade and turn into spheres and make them look 3D. I always make sure to give you examples. Just like this one. For today, you're going to be getting a piece of paper that looks something like this. So to begin, hold your pencil like we have in the video here. This is the correct way to hold your pencil whenever you're shading. You have your 3 fingers wrapped around the middle part of the pencil, your pointer finger near the top of the pencil so you can apply pressure, your thumb resting on the side for a brace. Using this, you can lay the pencil on its side and you can accurately shade, which I'll show you in a moment. Now, if this is too difficult for you, because my fingers have been broken so many times over the years that I can't really hold my pencil like that. Instead, How I like to hold the pencil is like this. And I'm about ready to show you. Like that. Because it achieves the same thing. It's just easier for me to hold the pencil that way. Now, it's up to you however you'd like to hold the pencil. Doesn't matter as long as it's laying on its side, and you will need a wooden pencil for this. The first step is to go ahead and mark out stippling because you're not going to be using that. We're not doing it. Go ahead, mark it out. Now, the first one that we're going to be working on is going to be the shading box up at the top. Now, I work dark to light. It doesn't really matter how you like to do this. I like to start with the darker values and go to the lighter values. If you want to go the other way around, that's perfectly fine. But something you want to keep in mind is do not let your palm of your hand pass over something you've already shaded, because then you're going to smudge and smear your artwork all to pieces. You're also not allowed to smudge in this assignment. You're never going to be allowed to smudge in any of the art classes that I have because, and I'll get to this in a later video, as a quick once over with it, it damages your paper by getting oils from your fingers on your paper. It also is a very sloppy way of achieving blending. Don't smudge. So start off by holding your pencil the correct way, go around in small circles, applying pressure and filling in the first square. Once you have that filled in, move over to the next square, lift up on your pencil a little bit, widen out your circles, and you'll get a lighter value. From there, you are going to continue on the boxes all the way down until you have the entire value scale filled in. The next one that we're doing is hatching. Hatching is diagonal line, and the closer the lines are together, the darker the value. So go ahead and fill in the first box with all diagonal lines really close together, all going the same direction. Next box over, space those lines a little bit further apart. Next one, space them a little bit more further apart, and continue down until the very last square doesn't have any lines in it at all. The last box is cross hatching, and cross hatching, I like to fill it in with lines going the same direction one way, and then I go back over it with diagonal lines going the other way. It's easier for me. If you would just like to crisscross them one at a time, perfectly fine, doesn't matter. The idea is it is hatching both directions. Closer together lines are, darker value. As they get further apart, the lighter the value. Go ahead, fill in the value scale with those, and that's going to be the end of the assignment for today. Tomorrow, we're going to be starting another lesson, which is drawing circles on a paper. So start with 3 circles that you draw on a paper. I will give you stencils for this. That's perfectly fine. And we are going to be filling those 3 circles in with the different value types. And we want to first start off by drawing little ovals on each one of the circles to indicate the different areas of lightness. So start with a circle up at the top like you have here and draw rings going down. The topmost circle or topmost ring is going to be white, and then going down from there is going to progress the value scale going down to the darker value. So the darker value is always going to be at the bottom. Doing this, you're going to work your way up the same way you did with the value scale, and then it's going to look like you have a 3-dimensional ball on your paper. If you'd like to add in a shadow with it, you can. The next circle you're going to be doing, you're going to be using hatching. So go ahead and add in the hatching lines and try to make it look as realistic as you can. The final one is going to be cross hatching. And same thing as before, try to make it look as realistic as you can. If you want to add in shadows, perfectly fine. And that is going to be your all's lesson for today. If you have any questions, please let me know. Hope you enjoy the lesson. Today, we are covering the element of art known as texture. Texture is what it sounds like. It is the way something feels, either visually or actually. And just like line, you have the actual texture or you have implied texture. And I like to give this example to my students. It is a cup, a plate, and a spoon made out of rabbit fur. I like to give this example because it has actual texture. You could actually go and pick this up and feel it. And the artist chose to use this material as the base for the artwork because he wanted to simulate the nice warm fuzzy feeling you get from drinking a cup of tea. And I think that's hilarious. This is another example of an artwork that has actual texture. This example is more commonly known as the melting dog. It is a bronze statue that is made to look like the animal itself is melting. If you were to go up and touch the surface of this sculpture, what kind of texture do you think you would feel? Would it feel bumpy, coarse? Would it feel soft and smooth? What do you think? So yeah, it would probably feel cold and smooth and rough and have the texture of metal because that's what it is. On the other hand, this is a drawing. So this would not have physical texture or actual texture. Instead, it would have implied texture. You have the implied texture of the skin, the wrinkles in the skin and the forehead, or the hair that is wispy. If you go up and touch this artwork, it's just a flat piece of paper, but it is implied that all those textures are there. You can get those textures by using different values and different tones, as well as placing those values next to each other to create the illusion of texture. Just because this artwork is photorealism, which is an art style to describe something that looks like a photograph, doesn't mean that only photorealism or realistic artworks can have texture. In fact, this artist is very famous for making simplistic art. In this artwork, I want you to tell me what texture you think the woman's hair has. So, did you say that the hair was straight hair? No, more than likely you said that it was curly or crinkly hair. And the reason you think that is because of those squiggly lines that the artist has chosen to include in the texture of her hair. Now, there are some types of art that have both implied and actual texture. For instance, the Impressionist painters, they wanted to try and capture light the moment it happened, because back then they didn't have photography like we have today. They knew that light would change every second, so they needed to paint as quickly as they could to try and capture that moment in time. And that was different than every other style of painting up to that point. They wanted to try and capture light as soon as it happened. So they didn't have time to mix colors. Instead, they would just take colors and put it straight on the canvas. Because of that, you can see the individual brush strokes of the colors, and you can see the specific colors that they used. They built up those colors to get different variations in colors. If you were to go up and touch this painting, not only would it have implied texture such as the texture of the grass or the texture of the woman's dress, but it would also have actual texture because all those layers of paint you would actually feel because they've all been built up as they were painting. And that leads me to your all's lesson. Your lesson is going to be broken down into 3 separate days where you are going to be having a different texture that you're going to try to imitate every single day. The first day, you're going to be trying to imitate the texture of hair by drawing this guinea pig. Day 2, you're going to try and imitate scales by drawing this dragon. And finally, day 3, you're going to try and imitate this drawing of a bonsai tree. The texture in here that you're going to try to imitate is not only the bark, but also the leaves, because the leaves kind of have the same resemblance as grass, and it would have close to the same texture. Now, I wouldn't be any kind of an educator if I didn't cite my sources, so all of those examples came from this book that I've had for many years, and it comes with a bunch of drawing prompts in it. Whenever you are following along with these and trying to replicate the textures, try and draw the artworks to where they are full-sized on the paper. Try and make it take up the whole page. And if it goes off the page, that's perfectly fine. Thank you all very much. I hope that you enjoyed this lesson, and I hope that it's taught you a little bit about creating textures inside of art. If you have any questions, let me know. Continuing our lessons in the elements of art, we are now going to be looking at form. Form is the element of art that actually combines multiple elements together to create a 3D looking object on a two-dimensional surface. For instance, you start off with a line that gets closed off to make a shape, and then you add values to that shape to create a form, which is something that looks three-dimensional but on a flat piece of paper, where it looks like it has depth, but in actuality, it's all implied. That is what form is, and form is used to create depth in artwork, to make something look three-dimensional when it's really not. For instance, this artwork is graffiti, and it is all graffiti, including the man wallpapering up the graffiti. It looks like that this man is actually standing there because of the use of values. It creates a form by using shading around the sides of where the light would be hitting and bouncing shadows around. And it has that illusion because not only does the shadow hit the man, but it also hits the wallpaper as well, therefore creating a form. Just like with this artwork, where the artist is standing in front of his pencil drawing of a deer, and the deer looks realistic because of the use of values in the form. So as it curves away from the light, it gets darker and creates that illusion of form. And then finally, probably the most famous optical illusion of all time, M.C. Escher's drawing hands. This is a great example of how line can then get turned into a shape, which then gets value added to it, which then gets turned into a form, and then it circles back around and starts drawing itself all over again. And that brings me to your all's assignment. Your assignment, you're going to be drawing toys, and you're going to be drawing them in the style of forms. And what I mean by that, you're going to be breaking down the toys into basic shapes, so they're basic fundamental shapes. Then you're going to be adding values to the shape itself, not the table. You're going to be shading the toy, which I'll get to in a bit, and then you're going to be turning that drawing into a form that has three-dimensional depth. As some examples, we have these student works here. These are great examples of how you can use shading and values to create three-dimensional forms just by observation. I do like this example of Pikachu because you can see how the artist starts off with a circle for the head and quickly outlines that circle, and then adds in the other shapes like the triangle for the arm and the triangle for the ears, and then they refine those lines. It's the perfect step and process that you need to take whenever you are creating art. These are also some very good examples of proper shading. Now, something that I want to point out is do not shade the table. Your main focus is going to be shading inside of the toy. If you shade the table underneath the toy and just have a plain white toy, it will not look like a form. Instead, it'll look like a bleached white toy that's sitting in a pile of something that I don't want to think about. Of course, I'm going to be giving you a live demonstration, so let's go ahead and jump over to the live demo. For my example, I chose to draw this Pikachu here. Now, it can apply for any toy at all. The first step is to always select your toy and then put it off to the side and do not touch it. Keep it in one place, because every time you pick it up and move it, you're going to change the lighting and your perspective on the toy. Start off with basic shapes, circles, triangles, squares, whatever you need. Just break down the area inside of the toy into its basic shapes. For instance, with Pikachu, I start off with a circle for the head, oval for the body, and triangles for the ears. Now, these lines are just preliminary lines. They are not set in stone. Once you get the basic shapes done, then you can go in and start adding in some more definitive lines. For instance, obviously Pikachu's head is not a perfect circle, but you can go in and start adding in those lines to make it look more like what you're drawing. Once you get those definitive lines down, then you can go in and start looking at the shading and values. Look at where the light is hitting it. Where the light is hitting the toy is going to be the lightest area, and then where the shadows are is going to be the darkest area. Do not shade the table. Instead, shade the toy. That is what makes a form possible. For instance, in this example, I am looking at the lighting where the light is hitting Pikachu at the top of the ear. and I'm creating the values and shading around the bottom side of the ear. You don't have to shade the whole thing. In fact, you can leave the area where the light from the room is hitting the toy, you can leave that perfectly white, and that's entirely fine. Try and make this drawing as big as possible. It'll help you out later. And that is going to be your whole assignment. Now, depending on when we have this lesson, sometimes I have this lesson last a couple days, other times I have this lesson last a week. It really depends on where I feel like this lesson needs to fall. Thank you all very much. I hope that you have learned more about the element of art known as form. If you have any questions, please let me know. In this lesson, we're going to be going over the element of art known as color, and you're going to be creating your very own custom color wheel using oil pastels. The element of art we're looking at today is color, and color is a special element of art because depending on how you want to look at it, it can either have a scientific definition or it can have an artistic definition. Now, before we get into that, let me explain how color works. Color works by light coming in, hitting an object, for instance, this red scarf on Snoopy. All of the other colors in the light spectrum is absorbed into that object except for the color you see. Instead, the color that you see is bounced off of that surface and then it goes to your eye and you perceive the color that is not absorbed.
I don't get it.
Now that might sound a little complicated. I can give you some examples of how you might be able to see this differently. For instance, if you take this scarf into a pitch black room, you're not going to be able to see it because there's no light. However, if you also take this exact same scarf into a haunted house or a roller rink where they have one of those black lights that make things look different colors, this is going to look purple. And the reason for that is because the light that is emitted in a black light is actually blue. That's why white shirts look blue. That's also why reds look purple. And why blues are still the same color, because blue and blue makes blue. In art terms, there's three different types of color that we're going to be focusing on. There's primary colors, secondary colors, and tertiary colors or intermediate colors. Primary colors are the three colors that make up all the other colors on the color wheel. The primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. Using these three colors, you can make every other color on the color wheel. However, you can never make these colors out of the other colors. So for instance, while you can mix yellow and blue to make green, you cannot mix green and orange to make yellow. When you mix two primary colors together, you get what is known as a secondary color. The secondary colors are orange, green, and purple or violet, depending on how you'd like to say that. What happens whenever you mix a primary color and a secondary color? Well, you get something that is known as a tertiary color or an intermediate color. Those two terms are interchangeable. An intermediate color or tertiary color happens whenever you take a primary color and you mix it with a secondary color, and you get a color that shares the name of both of the colors that you mixed. So for example, even though most people will say that this color here is lime green, the correct way to name this color would be yellow and green, because yellow mixes with green to make yellow green. Just like the one next to it, the orange, you take yellow and orange to make yellow orange. That is the same naming scheme throughout the entire color wheel. So my question for you, if you're paying attention, what color do you think that this is? And I'll give you a hint, it's not teal. Don't say teal. If you said red orange, you're entirely wrong. Instead, it is actually blue and green. Primary color blue, secondary color green, make blue-green. When all these colors come together in a pretty little wheel, we call it a color wheel, which, like I mentioned to you at the beginning of this video, is what you're going to be making today. Your assignment is to create your very own custom color wheel, and it can be in any style that you like. I am going to show you how to make a color wheel that goes around in a circle. That's the easiest one to make, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a demo. But if you want to do something else, say like, for instance, like this, or a heart or a butterfly or something like that, you are more than welcome to try that. It's up to you. I don't care what kind of color wheel you make. I just care that you have all 12 colors present in your color wheel. So let's go ahead and get started with the live demo. I'm going to be showing you how to make a custom color wheel like we have here using oil pastels and just red, yellow, and blue. I'm going to show you how to make a custom color wheel. How did I make this color wheel just using red, yellow, and blue? Okay, so what you need for this project, you are going to need a piece of paper and you're going to need red, yellow, and blue oil pastels. First thing, I like to always put down yellow because I think that it's a lot easier to start with a lighter color, and I'm going to start by putting this down in kind of a triangle effect. So we have yellow up the top. I like to go red next, so I like to drop down, put my little triangle here for red, and then complete the triangle with blue. This is going to help us get everything in order because by the end, this is just going to be one big circle. So when we do this, what I like to do is I like to go ahead and graph out the circle part way like this, where it just kind of goes down and around. And what you're going to want to do, you're going to want to do your yellow first because yellow is easiest to blend. And then you're going to want to complete this with some blues and reds. And as you can see, I kind of stopped halfway down through here, but as you can see right there, it's already starting to look a little green, and that's what we're wanting. And right here, so down here, up and over, we're just going to complete that like this.
That is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen.
But what we're going to be doing now, we are going to lightly be putting these colors over top of one another and blending them together very lightly. As you get further away from red, you just very lightly put in some red. As you get further away from blue, you very lightly put in blue. And what you're going to get is a smooth transition from one color to the other. Now we're going to move over to the red and yellow. Now yellow is a very special color because it doesn't take very much of any color to turn yellow into something else. So for instance, I didn't even add in any other colors, and as you can see right here, it's already changing from red to orange. And what we're going to want to do, we're just going to want to fade yellow into the red over here, and we're just going to bring some of that color and draw it up into the yellow. And now for the blue, we're going to do roughly the same thing. We're just going to take the yellow and we're going to blend it into the blue right here. And I got a little bit of red in there, but that's fine. We'll mix that in. And we're going to make a transition of green. So I'm just going to take some more blue, put it right in here, fade it up. And if you get that little bit of red in there, you can actually take your fingernail and scrape that up if you want, or a wooden part of a pencil or a pencil eraser or something like that. Just scrape that up. And there you have a very basic color wheel just using red, yellow, and blue. I want you to go in and label each one of your colors. Yellow right here, red, blue, green, orange, purple, or violet. Then we go into our tertiaries, the primary color and the secondary color. So primary color yellow with the secondary color orange. Red, secondary color orange. Red, violet. With this, if you'd like to add in these lines, you can. It's entirely up to you. If you do that though, just keep in mind that if you're using a marker, it might ruin the tip since this is oil. And that is how you can complete your very own custom color wheels like this using oil pastels. Your assignment for today, you're going to be making your very own version of this. If you'd like to go off the rails and do something completely different as far as design wise, I don't care. That's up to you. I am just looking for that you have all 12 colors down. Thank you all very much. I hope this was helpful and I hope that you enjoyed this lesson.